Hello, everyone. My name is Ben Wilkes. We haven't met before. I'm the program manager at the TomTom Foundation. And on behalf of our board and our team, I just want to thank each of you for being with us here today. This afternoon's event is part of a 7-week series called the Cities Rising Summit, which we are coming to a close on with this week entitled The Small City Moment. This week, we'll focus on ideas and solutions for small and mid-sized cities across America, especially in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. Today's event and this entire week of programs is brought to you by our partners at Apex Clean Energy, who we thank for their incredible support and collaboration throughout the process. The Cities Rising Summit has been made possible as well by the support of community members like you. So, this is your last chance to donate directly to the initiative. So we'd encourage you to consider doing so today on our website, tomtomfoundation.org/give. This afternoon's program, we're really excited for. We'll hear about how clean energy partners can empower rural communities to maximize long-term economic development opportunities through the opportunity provided by green energy. So this session is presented in partnership with Seoul UNESCO and Boyd and Site PLC. Seoul UNESCO develops renewable energy products, leveraging local knowledge and local boots on the ground. They do so by connecting rural landowners with new revenue opportunities through sustainable, cost-competitive energy generation. And Boyd and Site is a Virginia law firm dedicated to achieving clients' business objective in commercial real estate transactions and zoning matters. Thoughtful use of technology allows Boyd and Site to provide sophisticated, customized business advice and legal documents to businesses and institutions on time and on budget. So without further ado, I'd love to turn things over to Francis Hodge. So Francis is going to kick things off for us today in cahoots with Becky Campbell here, who he will introduce. But Francis is the co-founder and CEO of Seoul UNESCO, where he leads strategy, business development, policy, performance management, and community engagement. He uses his expertise in energy wholesale markets, policy, land use, and finance to develop utility-scale solar projects that connect society's needs for sustainable and cost-competitive energy. So Francis, I'm going to turn things over to you to get things started.
I have to say, every time I hear the bio, I think, I really got to take some time to shorten that. Thank you for reading that. But this topic, Becky and I think, have been talking about kind of these issues about solar and where solar is being deployed and issues that raises in terms of local community and how people perceive solar, utility scale solar projects that have a large footprint, but also how they can benefit these communities. I think we've been talking about this issue for a long time, and I'm looking forward to Becky and I kind of putting our thoughts out there. It might make some sense, Becky, for you to just give a little bit of your background so people know kind of where you're coming from on this topic.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Francis. So Becky Campbell, I'm Manager of Government Affairs for First Solar. And for those that aren't familiar with First Solar, we're the largest American solar panel manufacturer and largest solar panel manufacturer in the Western Hemisphere. We also do large-scale solar development. We've developed a ton of solar all around the country, and Virginia is an emerging market that we're really excited about. We see a lot of opportunity in, and maybe I'll just leave it at that, short and sweet.
Well, and I think when we think about this, there's obviously a big demand in Virginia. Maybe not everybody who's on this call kind of understands some of the drivers behind why this topic matters a lot. I don't know, Becky, if you want to, or I can, let me back up for a second. Becky and I talked about this yesterday. We felt like we're not going to have a moderator and one panelist. We didn't think that made a lot of sense. We're just going to have a conversation between Becky and I, and we kind of talk through what are some of the key areas we want to cover. But Becky, if you want to talk a little bit about the demand in Virginia, and I'm happy to piggyback on your thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, over the last couple of years, we started to see really rapid growing demand in Virginia, partially fueled by the Grid Transformation Act that passed in 2018. But even before that, I think, the market was starting to emerge. Virginia has a lot of opportunities for citing data centers, and obviously those have come to Virginia in a really big way. And something that we've been seeing in the solar industry is that large corporations like the data center companies are increasingly setting their own sustainability goals and specifically renewable energy goals, and they almost command at this point to have access to renewables within any market that they move into. And so I think that kind of kicked things off in a big way in Virginia. And now this year, with the passage of the Virginia Clean Economy Act, we'll see that escalate even further. So there's kind of a compounding number of issues that are driving the market interest. And then I shouldn't leave off the list the fact that the cost of solar has declined so rapidly. I think between 2010 and 2020, it's decreased on the order of 80%, if not more. And so, solar is, whereas back in 2010, it was kind of a premium price energy technology, it's really competitive today with every other source of energy, including new natural gas.
Yeah, and Becky, being with a global company, has a global view, and my company, Sol UNESCO, we're 7 people, we're a small little company, but we have developed the different stages, 1.4 gigawatts of solar in Virginia, and we are the boots on the ground in Virginia. And one of the things that I just keep seeing from my interactions, because we have an office in Southern Virginia now, and I interact with a number of large landowners. They're getting inundated from developers from all over the world, trying to find opportunities to develop land for solar. And all these people are reacting to the fact, Becky explained it very well, when I talk to people at Dominion, they say to me, they expect they're going to have to deploy a gigawatt per year of solar for like the next 10 years on average. And that's when you think I don't believe we're quite at a gigawatt today, and we have, started the first construction on utility scale solar about 4 years ago. So in the first 4 years, we have not gotten to a gigawatt, and now we're trying to find a way to deploy a gigawatt per year. And that's the dynamic that I think, rural communities where these projects, in my opinion, make the most sense, are reacting to. They're seeing that demand driving behavior in the marketplace where, I was speaking to a chairman of the board of supervisors who will remain anonymous, but, their county had put a moratorium in place on solar because they were uncertain whether this made sense. And just the other day, literally like 2 days ago, he said to my team, we're pulling the moratorium because we have landowners and people who are on our planning commission saying to us, get rid of that moratorium. We don't want to get left behind. There's clearly like something big happening, and there's an opportunity to, generate real significant wealth from land that people may have had in their families for generations, right? And so, the demand is causing a lot of activity in these rural areas and causing the rural areas to try to figure out what's right. And I think the topic here is how can solar work with these rural communities in a way that is truly a win-win? And in the last 5 years of being in this market and just focused on Virginia, I've come to really fully appreciate, and of course I'm biased, but that we can be a very good partner. We can deliver a lot of benefits. And I think that's what we really want to focus in on, but that's a little bit of the backdrop. There's huge demand in Virginia. Dominion data centers, other commercial buyers. I'm aware of multiple deals that should be coming out and getting public press that demonstrate that it's not just Dominion, it's not just the Clean Economy Act, but it's a lot of different companies that believe this is the right thing to do that's driving this demand. I think Becky and I probably share the view, we've reached the tipping point. This is absolutely going to happen. We are going to move to a clean economy, energy source in Virginia. A lot of hard work over the years, people like Becky and many others who have, worked hard to get the right policies in place. So now we're at this point where we've got this demand, we've got this interest, and so how do we provide the benefit to these rural communities? And Becky, you want to talk a little bit about what you see as the benefits we can provide?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, anytime we are approaching a community about a project, Francis, I think you'd agree with this. One of the first things that local elected officials are going to want to know is, how is this going to benefit my community from a financial standpoint, from potential job opportunities? What is that going to look like? And if it's not advantageous to the community, then, they're going to be hesitant to embrace it. They want to make sure that, if as an industry, we are taking up large swaths of property in their community, that they're reaping some benefits from that. And I think that's a fair expectation. So I think that's where the conversation starts. And then, once we kind of get past those initial considerations, then we start to dig into the details. And I think the local officials then want to know, they want to hear feedback from their constituents, any concerns that they have, and they want to make sure that as an industry, we truly do want to be a good partner to the community, that we're going to be responsible, that we're going to be accountable, and we're going to deliver on the promises that we're making. So, I mean, maybe, Francis, it makes sense to kind of walk through those in that order and talk economics to begin with, because I think that's, the very big, first consideration for these communities.
Sure. And let me do just a quick little segue. I had meant to, guess I didn't have my notes totally organized. I think also we need to lay out the context of what's going on in some of these communities. And there's a really interesting book for those who are interested in what's going on in rural communities in Virginia, which I think is, it's very similar to what's happening in rural communities in many areas of the United States. A guy named Augie Wallmeyer wrote a book called The Extremes of Virginia. Augie, former energy lobbyist, and it's really, you read his book, and this was pre-pandemic, and I think some things probably have been exacerbated by the pandemic, would be my concern, and worry. But he basically paints this picture of, it's beautiful country, and it truly is, but there's just so many economic distresses, and it's a vicious cycle that many of these communities are going through. Young people are moving out. There's not the tax base to provide the social services. There's two statistics I think that are really telling. These rural communities in Virginia, the poverty rate is 67% greater than the state average. And drug overdoses are 56% higher than the state average. I mean, those are striking numbers, right? And like I said earlier, we have now a house, an office down in Sachs, Virginia, down near the North Carolina border. So we see a little bit of what's going on, but these communities have been facing some very, very tough times by just the basic trends of people moving to urban centers, right? Where there's opportunity, and it's not 100% across the board. Every, area, every community is its own unique situation, but many of these communities are facing some pretty rough times. And when you talk to people in these communities, they recognize that they need something to help kind of turn things around. And I've had people who are on the board of supervisors say to me, well, you know what? Nobody else is knocking on our door right now, and you guys are, and you guys can bring these benefits. So I think that's an important aspect of this too, is that, and again, I want to emphasize, there are communities like Mecklenburg in Virginia. Microsoft has a massive data center there, deploying billions of dollars. I don't know what the total number is now. I lost count, but I think 10 billion or more in a community where $10 billion is mind-numbingly big, right? And so Mecklenburg is fine, right? Mecklenburg has Microsoft, but many of the other communities don't have a Microsoft building a massive data center. So with that all being said, there's the demand, there are these challenges in these rural communities. We are here now finding opportunities to deploy literally billions of dollars on these projects, many billions of dollars across all of these communities. But in our projects and the size and scale, often with these rural communities, we're talking certainly tens of millions, much more likely hundreds of millions of dollars, and in some cases billions of dollars in a rural community, which is potentially a game changer for these communities. And so that starts to get into the benefit. And Becky talked about how, the economics of this, what is the benefit fiscally? Becky and I, we both are part of a group called MDVCA. Last General Assembly session, we worked on tax policy because many of these communities felt that they weren't receiving what they should be receiving from these large solar projects, and we ended up, and I don't think the details of the tax law in Virginia really matter, but the order of magnitude from what the current land use is today to what it could be with a solar farm, I run these numbers frequently. We have 14 projects that we have either developed or are in development in Virginia, and so we look at these economic benefits regularly. And typically you're looking at current land use is delivering $1,000 to a few $1,000s to a few tens of thousands of dollars, maybe $20,000 to with solar, and under the new tax laws, you're talking maybe $200,000. So you could be going up 50, 60, 70x over what they're receiving today, becoming immediately the largest taxpayer in the county. And these counties, they get often about 2/3 of their revenue from property taxes, and we would dramatically increase that. They also spend about half of their money on education. And solar farms, one of the things we don't do is we don't bring in families and require new educational facilities. We're not a development in that sense. So we deliver a lot of revenue, and we have almost no impact on the services of the county. Yes, the first responders need to be trained on what to do if something goes wrong within the facility, which is an unlikely kind of event. But certainly one that you want to make sure you've addressed appropriately. So there's, you know, some things like that. Typically we pay for it ourselves to make sure that that training happens. And we're providing jobs to people in the area that maybe previously had to travel outside of the area. So, you know, maybe talk a little bit about those jobs is the next thing on the agenda. But just to make the point, very, very significant increase in revenues to these counties from these solar farms. And typically we're using land that doesn't have another purpose, right? If there was really the likelihood that a data center was going to be on that land, the landowner probably wouldn't enter into a contract through a solar farm. They'd hold out for the data center, or if there was some other opportunity. So this is truly the highest and best use often of the land from an economic perspective. You know, we can talk about the concerns people have with how we're changing the landscape. That's a different issue. But from a purely economic perspective, this is almost certainly the highest and best use of the land that we're targeting. And again, we have almost no impact on social services. So this is a big inflow of money into many communities who have watched their revenues go down and their costs go up dealing with social problems that they've got. But maybe, Becky, we should switch and talk about jobs.
Sure. Yeah. But before we shift, just wanted to reiterate some of your points there. So earlier this year, MDVCA partnered up with Mangum Economics to do a really detailed study on this. And to your point, Francis, about kind of, you know, the best economic use of land, that study looks at 3 different regions in Virginia. It looked at the South Central, the North Central, and the Southeastern. And those 3 regions were selected because that's where we're seeing the most rapid growth in solar deployment. And the results of that, and then it looks at, you know, the net economic benefit for utility scale solar development versus a residential use versus an agricultural use versus an industrial use as a manufacturing facility and, you know, on that land. And the result of that study was that in every single region, the net economic benefit from solar far outweighed the other potential land uses. And so I agree, like we could argue the benefits beyond just economics of preserving agricultural land or just, you know, preserving green space. But from an economic standpoint, you know, that's what that assessment turned out. And Francis, I think it's largely because of your point that, you know, as these projects go in, they create a really big cash infusion in terms of property taxes and other local tax revenue, but without putting any significant burden on the local services. And so it really is an overall net benefit.
Absolutely. The interesting thing, I think, is slowly but surely, counties are beginning to see this, beginning to recognize that there's a benefit. And some people who had questioned this now, especially with changes in the tax laws, seem to be, you know, sort of changing their perspective on can solar be something that's good for that community, which I think is really important because perception is reality, and it's nice not to be fighting against the tide of perception, regardless of whether your facts are right or wrong. So
yeah, absolutely.
But you know, maybe we can also talk a little about jobs. I mean, you know, one of the criticisms that we get over and over again is you will not be you know, a given solar project is not going to result in a lot of full-time operational jobs. Once it's built, once that construction activity happens, you know, there just aren't going to be that many jobs, which is absolutely true. Not oftentimes people get it a little wrong. You know, we do result in operational jobs, just maybe not full-time bodies like working at the site all the time. And we'll talk a little bit about that, but maybe let's start with the construction aspect of this, because I think people misunderstand that and see construction jobs as not a good thing, when actually, when you think about what's likely to be a decade of construction or more, as we transition our energy source to a clean energy source, you know, that certainly is something different than building one solar project, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I mean, I think, you know, so just ballpark figure, you know, 100 megawatt solar project is probably going to generate, what would you say, Francis, somewhere in the range of 200 temporary full-time jobs during construction. And that construction phase is probably going to last somewhere in the range of 12 to 18 months. You know, so that's a good chunk of time for full-time employment for these construction workers. You know, and one of the common arguments that we hear is, yeah, but what happens when the project's done and then that person's out of work? I've heard a lot of really good arguments from IDEW and others that work in the trade saying, like, look, this is just the nature of our industry. I mean, every construction job is temporary. You finish your project and you move on to the next. And so, you know, that's to be expected in our industry, and it's just how it works. And but these are good paying jobs that, you know, sustain families. And at the end of the day, you know, that helps the local economy. And so something that the industry has helped to support, and in large part due to Francis's efforts, I feel like you were one of the masterminds behind this initiative, is something called the SHINE program, which is a workforce development program that the utility scale solar industry in Virginia helped to stand up last year. And this program's developed in partnership with the State Community College Network. And, you know, its intent is to train a local workforce to make sure that when these projects are being constructed, the construction workers are you know, from within the local communities as much as feasibly possible. And, you know, I think one of the things that is brilliant about the way that program is structured is that, you know, while the students get hands-on field experience in the installation of, you know, the solar panels themselves, and they get, you know, acclimated and familiar with that, they are learning skills that are broadly useful across all of the construction trades. So that, you know, if they cycle off of a solar project and onto another construction project, that's possible. If they're learning skills that easily translate into those other projects. In some cases, they're getting certifications that will make them better qualified for those projects when they come up. And, you know, while I think COVID disrupted the program a little bit earlier this year, it had some great early success. I think, 4 or 5 cohorts have been through the program so far. There's a focus on developing some mobile learning labs so that the program can go statewide and travel to where the need is. And, you know, I think it's, as we see the industry grow, you know, hopefully we can get more students through the program so that as much as possible, we can ensure that we're hiring a local workforce and building a workforce in Virginia.
And so I got to tell the story of how this all started, because it's just such a funny story to me. Hopefully everybody else will enjoy it too. So the brother-in-law of one of my largest landowners happened to be a supervisor in a county where I was trying to get a project permitted. And he was against the project. It's just funny in and of itself, of course. We used to, the landowner and I still laugh about it. But he would always say to me, Francis, and I probably can't say exactly the way he said it because we're live, but he basically was making the point in a colorful way that the jobs wouldn't end up in Mecklenburg, well, anyways, in his county, and because he didn't think that the workers could pass the drug test in his county, and so one day I got somebody to introduce me to a guy named Al Roberts who ran Southside Virginia Community College, and Al and I sat down, had breakfast one day, and I said, is this right? I mean, is it really not? Because Southside Virginia Community College is very involved in lots in training for lots of different trades and things like that, as are many of the other community colleges. Virginia has a tremendous community college system. And Al, at the time, he's no longer, he's retired now, but he was president of Southside Virginia Community College. He said, no, that's not true. If you provide good wages and training, you will find workers in the area where your projects are. And that's really what Shine is all about, is to, we as a solar industry, we can't guarantee anybody a job, right? What we can do is we can do everything in our power to make sure the tools are in place to maximize the benefit to the local communities. The program is in place to provide the training, that we as developers, and I do this on a regular basis now, keep track of who in the community could, be involved in the project in some way, and let the construction firm know. We don't control the construction firm; they make their own decisions. But you should give these firms an opportunity to bid. Make sure you are giving these firms an opportunity to bid, right? And that's all we can do is connect the dots as much as we possibly can, and provide programs to make sure that the people in these communities have the opportunity. And to me, that's where we can make some real change. We can provide revenues to the county services to help with things like the poverty and all the other social issues that some of these rural communities face. Healthcare is a huge problem in many of these rural communities. And then to the extent that we can create careers for people, construction careers, operational careers, there's with the amount of solar that's going to be deployed in this area, there's going to be companies that are going to provide services for these solar farms. Things will go wrong. Panels will, start to, malfunction. When you deploy 500,000 panels or some number like that on a really large utility scale solar, even the best manufacturing process, point whatever 0.001% defect means that there will be a few panels that go bad every once in a while, right? So you are going to have these jobs during operations for people also. And then we can create communities with good paying jobs that people don't have to travel an hour or more to go to the good paying job. And maybe the decision is to stay and raise the family there. And then there's, all the benefits that go along with people who have a vested interest in. I have 2 high school children upstairs right now in front of the computers, right? You have a vested interest in your community when you have kids in school, and you really want to see things change in a way that's more, to me, visceral. So kind of got a little bit off on a tangent there, but I think the job piece is so important.
And a really interesting report came out, I think, earlier this week or late last week. I saw some articles about it, and I think it was published by a group called BW Research Partnership. But it looks at, clean energy jobs and what they pay versus, the average median U.S. hourly wage. And the study found that clean energy jobs on average pay 25% more than the median U.S. Worker receives. And they're also more likely to offer healthcare and retirement benefits. And so, Francis, to your point, this industry creates opportunities for job skill development and then higher wages for the individuals that are going to get trained and work in it.
And one other thing that is a real challenge in these communities is access to the internet. And this is something that we as an industry, laying down the gauntlet, we should, Becky, you're still on the board, right, of MWCF, right?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, good. So you should, you can maybe carry this torch for me. But, we have this house in Sax, Virginia, literally there's a business that builds mobile modular homes. It's a half mile, I'm pretty sure, maybe it's a mile away. They have internet access at their facility. I'm trying to get the internet to my house. It's really challenging, and I'm willing to pay to do it, right? I have the resources to do that now. But and one of the things that's really interesting that I've learned is these communities are getting a lot of federal money to federal and state money to deploy internet, because the pandemic has really, for those who didn't know it before, now I think 90% of Americans realize if you don't have internet access, you are just, it's a horrible situation for your kids, right? And so, especially right now. And but it's just challenging to deploy fiber. And, we've talked to the fiber companies, the internet service providers that would lay the line and all that stuff. And, the issue is we're in an area where it's very sparsely populated, right? And so they're using the federal and state money as they should as a business. I'm not criticizing them at all, but they're saying, okay, we got all this money. Where in this county can we, deploy these funds and build out the fiber optic infrastructure to provide the internet that makes the most sense, which means the more densely populated areas of the county, right? They're not doing anything wrong. They're solving a problem for many people, and probably doing it the way that's best, because there is an unlimited amount of money, and so the money is being put out there. But our projects should look for opportunities. We are going to be bringing fiber optic communications to our projects. We have to. It's required in order for us to connect to the transmission system. And when we do that, what neighborhood do we go through? How can we do something on this issue and be helpful, basically, right? I think we should really look for opportunities. Sadly, I'm learning it's not as easy as just raising your hand and saying, hey, if I spend some money, can I bring the fiber a mile and then you can extend it? It doesn't quite work like that. It's more complicated. You have to, if we're going to really do anything with this issue where we can have a material impact based on where our projects are located, somebody's going to have to roll up their sleeves, dig in, and spend some real time on this, because otherwise there'll just be a lot of happy talk and we'll pat ourselves on our back for the happy talk, and then a few years down the road be like, well, what happened? Nothing happened.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think if COVID has, this is something that COVID has really shown us, is that there's so much disparity in rural communities because of lack of access to broadband, and it's impeding, like you said, Francis, it's impeding students' ability to learn remotely. I'm sure that it's impacting employees' ability to work remotely when states were under stay-at-home orders and employers were instructed to have work from home as much as possible. It just makes it impossible. And so I agree with you. I don't think that we should pat ourselves on the back just yet. We did one of the tax bills that the industry worked on this year was a bill that created a legal opportunity for project developers to offer proffers to localities when they're building projects. And I think this was one of the issues that we had top of mind in constructing and pushing that bill, that I think there could be, additional work done on this. I've seen some developers that already have projects under construction have made charitable contributions because of COVID to set up Wi-Fi hotspots for students so that, they have places that they can go so that they can get their education. But I think that's, that's not far enough. And if we're going to be in a situation like this again, and it's tough to tell how long this current situation is going to last, and when we're all going to get back to normal. It's a big issue, and I think COVID drew a lot of attention to it, and it's something that needs to be addressed, and the industry definitely has a role to play in that.
And though I'm really happy to hear though that projects are looking for those opportunities to provide hotspots, right? Because one of the things I've learned in one of the communities where we're developing a project is, there are tough choices being made about where to locate them. When you have a massive county that's very sparsely populated, there's no, one-size-fits-all solution on where you locate the hotspots. And so and they only have so many funds again, so much they can deploy on this. And so they pick as best as they can based on the infrastructure that exists, where they think there's the need, and they're trying to optimize, across those two things. Just us being out by the virtue of us providing that fiber service to our own facilities, it sure does seem like, hey, if there's a grocery store along the way or whatever, or just, an open field, I don't know, like we just need to be creative as an industry and look for opportunities to be helpful in our communities where we are developing our projects and constructing our projects. I think if we just do that, you can help, you help one person, help two people, whatever, builds upon itself.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, okay. Here's a question from Julia Campus. What's your sense of localities? Oh, I lost the question. I got do you have it?
I have it, yeah. So the question is, what's your sense of localities and neighbors' opinions of facilities post-construction? There's usually a lot of discussion and opinions during permitting, but wondering what locals think after the project is operational. Francis, have you had experience with this thus far?
No, I have not. So the interesting thing, I think, is that you just don't hear much about projects once we now have, I don't know, utility scale projects. You know the number, I'm guessing like somewhere between 10 and 15 in Virginia.
Yeah, that's my guess too.
Yeah. So you don't hear any issues, right? And like I always say, what better neighbor could you want than somebody who's required to keep a buffer between them and you? You know, a vegetated buffer that's designed to minimize the view of their facilities, and their permit requires them to maintain it, and they really make no noise, so they throw no parties. You know, and what better neighbor could you want than that? And I think that's the hurdle we need to get over, which is once we've had some experience in Virginia, once we can point to enough examples of where we can go and talk to neighbors of existing facilities that have been there for a few years and say, what's your experience been? And I feel very certain I know what the answer is. Gee, I forgot they were there, right?
Yeah.
They didn't see them, they didn't hear them.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think, my company, First Solar, is, you know, we haven't even begun construction on our first project in Virginia yet. So we haven't had this experience in the Commonwealth yet, but we have constructed, you know, tons of projects all over the country and all over the world. And I tend to agree with you. I think during the permitting phase, there can be a lot of contention. And I think a lot of times it's just driven by fear of the unknown. If it's, you know, the first project that a community is seeing, you know, I'm sure that they've experienced in the past, a developer comes in, they make big promises, they may or may not always follow through on those. And so, you know, I think we get a healthy dose of skepticism, and it's on the developers to, in good faith, work to address those concerns and you know, give them the attention that they deserve. So, you know, they're credible concerns often, and usually, you know, we have easy answers to them, and it's just making sure that we get, you know, correct information into the community's hands so that they can get comfortable with the project. And then during construction, you know, I think there's increased traffic on the road, there's probably some construction noise, but once you kind of get through that phase, then I agree with you. I think, you know, community members probably forget about the project altogether. It, you know, it sits there, it's quiet. It doesn't really have a direct impact on the community or the neighbors, and you know, versus an industrial use or an agricultural use. Like, there's no sound, there's no smell, there's no, like we said, there's, you know, limited impact on local services, and so it just kind of sits there and produces energy quietly, you know, for the next 25, 30 years. And then at the end of that time, the land can be converted back to its previous use, whether that's agricultural or something else. You know, I think something that has been interesting that we've seen in other markets, and we haven't really seen it in Virginia yet, but I suspect we might get there, is in some other regions, we've seen a shift towards having kind of dual use for some of these properties. And so something we've seen a lot of in projects that we've supported in Florida is sheep grazing on property sites. And, you know, it serves a dual purpose. It gives kind of the shepherds a place to graze their sheep, and, you know, carry on with their farming. And for the owner of the solar project, it's site maintenance. They mow the lawn, and then you don't have to bring in machinery to do that. And I think that is something that we've heard a lot of positive feedback from neighbors on when it's been used. So if there is kind of an agricultural community that can partner up on something like that, then I think we've heard really positive feedback post-construction about the project, just because it's another way to kind of create some economic benefits and some job opportunities that are kept local. But overall, I think it's kind of finished construction, and then it tends to be forgotten.
Right. Yeah, that's right. And I think that there was an interesting article about a lady, and I think she was in Maine, that has now created a business where, I'm not sure if it's sheep or it's something else, but she's going to solar farms and saying, hey, can I graze my, if it's sheep, it was sheep, I'm not sure, but on at your site. And that's now her business, that she goes around doing that.
Yeah. I recently discovered, and I'm really into the sheep grazing thing at solar farms. I grew up on a farm, and so I love the two industries partnering up. There's a trade association for sheep grazers that specifically graze their sheep at solar farms now, because it's emerging as not much of a trend, and there's a need for it. And I've read that in Massachusetts, there's such high demand for it. There aren't enough shepherds to meet the market demand. And so they're trying to recruit shepherds and gather more flocks to help support the number of projects that are seeking this type of dual use.
Julia Campus asks, speaking of sheep grazing, what are some friends you are seeing trends you are seeing as requirements or desires from communities where these projects are cited? So this is interesting because I was just today going to address a letter to the editor that on not one of my projects, but on another project in a county where I'm looking to develop a project, well, I'm in the process of developing a project. And the point the article made is, let's slow down, let's study where these projects should go. And having spent about 30,000 miles per year in my car, traveling and meeting with landowners over the last 4 years, each year about 30,000 miles. I can tell you, I don't think it's a good idea to try to plan where these projects go. I think that certainly there are times when projects should not be built because the developer cited it in a place that's just, when the community looks at the pros and cons, they come to the conclusion, this is not what we want in this location. And I think that's perfectly fine. And that's the risk we take as developers. But, we as practitioners are out there evaluating sites. And believe me, we look at how many neighbors do we have? Are there cultural sites nearby? Are there specific waterways that we want to avoid being nearby? Those kinds of things. And we're evaluating all those things real time and trying to determine where the best sites are located. And trying to do this from a kind of top down, have folks study this issue and then make recommendations. And, I just think that, frankly, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I personally think it's a good thing. The industry is charging full steam ahead. The industry is making these decisions real time, and you're not going to be able to stop it. I mean, I just think that's a reality. And so what we should be doing though is helping counties think through what are the best conditions that can be placed on these projects. When we go through a permitting, counties usually require certain setbacks, certain buffers, and often it's a fairly, I would say, kind of superficial engagement with the project. Sadly, I think it could be much more in depth, where we take a look at the site. We see, are there specific areas that we want to, avoid, and or we want to create more of a buffer or anything like that. There are creative ways for us to blend into the community in a way that we truly are we're basically invisible to the local community, right? And the other thing too, I would point out, we often go into these sites, these large sites that have been timber, agricultural areas, and we clean up a lot of things that you don't want just lying around like they have been lying around for a long time. Abandoned cars, abandoned trailers, just trash. Sadly, some of these sites that are very remote, So anyways, what I'm trying to say is, I don't think that trying to do a top-down, here's where solar sites should be, is practical at this point in time, nor is it going to really get you to the right solution. I think it's a local decision as to weighing the pros and cons of a particular solar farm, and does it make sense?
Yeah, and I think, Francis, you probably agree with this. Most developers don't want to site a project in a community that is vigorously opposed to it. Most developers want to have a good partnership and a good relationship with the community that they're siting in. And if, I know for our company, if we get into a situation where we choose a site and then we find out that there's immense opposition to the project for some reason or another, or the county just can't get behind it, then we tend to cut our losses and move on, because we don't want to be cited where we're not wanted. We want the community to view the project as an overall benefit. And if that's not going to be the case, then we didn't select the right site. That's not the case with every developer, but I would say most developers tend to take that approach to the process. And, when you take that approach, it just alleviates headaches on the local end. So, you're not like constantly fighting an uphill battle through the permitting process or during construction. And, you feel welcome within the community. And ultimately, I think that's what we all want.
I think they're saying we're out of time now. Then you wrapping up?
I hate to cut this off because this has been such a great conversation to listen into, but we do want to be respectful of people's time.
Sure.
So thank you both so much for being here, and for everyone who's listening in. This has been part of the last moments of the Cities Rising Summit. So thanks for being a part of it. I dropped a survey link in the chat if anyone wants to hang out. We're going to throw on some slides and music, and just you feel free to fill that out. And thank you again to Apex Clean Energy and Seoul UNESCO and Boyden Site for helping bring this program to life. And thank you, Becky and Francis, for sharing with us today. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yep. Talk soon.